Hello, welcome. I'm Imogen. We're streaming. Uh, Today we're gonna be reading classic poetry that I have not decided on what we're reading yet, which is super awkward. 'Cause that's the sort of thing I would normally choose before stream began. But here I am with nothing certain, nothing decided. Uh, and that's okay. We'll figure it out. And uh, and so it goes. Nikki, welcome. Good afternoon. Happy Pi Day. Yes, Pi Day 314. Another reason that March is the best month in the year. It's got Pi Day. It's got spring. It's got my birthday in 10 days. Uh, yeah, all of these things are excellent. Am I streaming on my birthday? I feel like that's something I would want to know. Uh, okay, my schedule does not have me streaming on my birthday, which is, I think, a good thing. But I streamed the day before. Yeah, Pi Day 3.14. Many years ago, it would have been 1.5 in 2015. That was cool. That was a very special Pi Day. 3.1415, 3.14, 1592, 6535, 897, 9323, 8462. That's about what I know. I think that's all correct. I think that's like 20 digits. But I knew more in middle school. I was like that child who had like 50 digits of pi just on the dome. So whenever something is a 314, my ears perk up a little bit. Like the blender that we have keeps track of the number of times it's been used as a little counter, and pretty recently it got to 3141. I was really excited about that. Hello, Ishmael. I don't know if I'm supposed to try to pronounce that or not, but Raitanige Oleya Sugi Banditu. Probably some greeting. So I suppose I just say that back to you in turn, unless it means something entirely different. Then I don't say that back to you in turn. But welcome, and I am yapping, and currently just trying to figure out what poem we're reading today, because I haven't decided, and I think like maybe I was going back and forth in my head. I think it could be kind of cool to read like a basho haiku. Uh, I think it could be kind of cool to read something by Neruda. I think it could be kind of cool to read a poem by Ginsberg. Uh, I think it would be cool. I mean, we could read "O Captain, My Captain" because that one was talked about on a prior stream. These are all options. I'm trying to learn Kannada. I don't know what that language is. I'd imagine that it has nothing to do with Canada. Uh, ka, uh, oh, it's from India. That's cool. It has a very pretty script. Wow, I like that a lot. The language that I'm making right now, something I'm stuck on, is definitely the script. Because it's hard to make a good looking script for a language, and I have a lot of the syntactical things and phonetic things worked out. But man, making a script is tricky. And making it look good and making it like make sense with the rules of the language and how it was developed. So, but it's fun. I love making languages. I'm more into making them than learning them, I think. Though I still would like to learn languages in my life. You wrote the most nihilistic poem last night. The most nihilistic language. That would be quite the accomplishment if it truly was. I presume that's like circular logic, the one that you posted, and I think I also saw on your Instagram maybe. Um, Value is not found, right? Uh, I wish you the best in the overcoming of that nihilistic sentiment, because I know that can be pretty impenetrable and difficult for me, and the most nihilistic for me. Yeah, I figured you meant something like that. I wonder what my most nihilistic poem is. I've written some very very nihilistic poems. I think it's probably this poem called uh yeah, it has this like straight up super nihilistic title that I'm not remembering. I think it's in this section. Um Not easy to disappoint. It's like will there be something like hmm, it's some really miserable title, but I really don't remember what it is. And maybe that's okay, right? Maybe that's a good thing that I no longer am particularly attached to my most nihilistic poem I've ever written. uh, I think I prefer it that way, right? Um, but it was really bad. It was like really, 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 really miserable and kind of a cool poem to speak, which is why I'm like looking for it. Like I think it was actually, decent as a poem, but my skin, if glass green, everything somewhat about me. I don't know, if I don't find it here in one of these, I'll say I've lost it, and I think that's okay. That's a like it's somewhere buried in my poems, but if I don't find it, I think that's okay, because nihilism is no longer a sentiment I prefer. I was thinking about this the other day, uh, and sharing art. I was at this like event where people were reading stuff, uh, and you know, some of them I felt like, they went on stage and it really felt like they had something to say, and that like there was a something that they were trying to convey to the audience, and that was usually very powerful. And then there are some people who go up on a mic and it just feels like they're there kind of to read their poem, and that's fine. Like if you're going up to practice your thing, that's cool. Um, but it's not. I don't really think that's very much of like an artistic experience for like you to be practicing reading your thing, and everyone else to sort of be subjected to your, um, technical and artistic difficulties. um, so I was thinking about when we write, when we perform, when we create. Um, I was asking myself the question, like, do I have a reason? Do I have something I'm trying to say? Like, why am I writing? Why am I streaming? Like, what are these things like angled toward? Um, and that's something that's been on my mind, like this idea of direction and purpose. Uh, and I don't think I have a good one for sharing my poetry or even writing poetry, because my poems are just these like things I do sometimes. uh, and I think stream is much more clear, right? I think the suggestion that people can be critical and like to demonstrate a a way of thought that I think is useful for people. Um, is really like what I hope for. Like I hope someone would take the things they learn on stream and go do it themselves. That would be very special to me. Um, so that's what I care about for this. I don't know about sharing my own work, and I did not find my nihilistic poem, my most nihilistic poem. I sometimes ask my friend, how do you say X in Canada? And they reply, I guess you would just say that in English. I started feeling like I am learning a language no one speaks. Uh, yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, there's value in that regardless. Like, no one speaks Latin. There are dead languages. No one speaks Pali, really. Um, but like learning these things can still be useful. It can still teach you things, and that is a language that does have speakers, right? I think I looked it up. It said something like uh 50 million speakers. Yeah, it's just that a lot of them live in India, and you're in like not India, so it just depends, right? And yeah, like it's sort of unfortunate, maybe, that, like you say, Nikki, language is dying to digital media, and English is kind of the primary language of most of the internet. I mean, you have like the Chinese internet, which is sort of isolated in its bubble, but like just in terms of what's on the internet, the vast majority of it is in the English language, and that's a sort of fascinating thing, right? uh, I still need to choose a poem. Um, Basho. Like, we could do like the Basho, like bell haiku, or the Basho frog pond, and that would be fun to sort of analyze something so incredibly small, right? Like whether that can be a you know subject worth dedicating an entire stream to, right? Like a little 3 lines. Like how much can one really analyze a haiku? Is an interesting question to me, right? Like the old pond a frog leaps in, sound of the water, right? Is the one I was thinking of. Uh, and I don't know if I'm like into that today. So maybe not. Maybe we'll just read "Oh Captain, My Captain," uh, and that will be cool because I've never really read it. Poem by Walt Whitman, written after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Uh, that's all I know about it. That is literally all I know. But I do know also that it's in the movie Dead Poets Society, and I really like that film. And I never actually read the poem after watching the film, even though I said I was going to. So that seems like a reasonable thing to talk about today. I like that idea. I mean, it's one of the most famous American poems. We read Harlem last week, which is a very different American poem. So could have some interesting, nice sort of contrast to that. I don't know. And I guess we'll start reading it. We'll start talking about it. We'll jump into this very famous work. Uh, this is like super not cool. Okay. That this actually looks bad. Okay, we're gonna mess with the camera for a second so it is straight. Does that look straight? That looks straight. And then it has to come in more. It was way up high for the collage stream, and now it has to be fixed. What is... Okay. This is why I set these things up before the stream, because otherwise I sit here looking rather foolish for a considerable amount of time when I should just be reading poetry. But I guess it's okay. There's no rush. These streams are mostly for me on the Saturdays, so they can be at the pace that I wish. Okay. Oh, Captain, My Captain by Walt Whitman. A poem that many people have read in school, probably. A poem that many a student has probably, like, hated and not enjoyed the fact that they're being subjected to reading this poem by this random guy named Walt, who, like, is writing about some guy named Abraham Lincoln, that all of this happened, like, 200 years ago. But there's probably something good about it. There's probably some reason, and I would like to find what the hype is about here. Oh, Captain, my captain. Oh, Captain, my captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. The port is near. The bells I hear, the people all exulting. While follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh heart, 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 oh the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead. Oh Captain, my captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills. For you the bouquets and ribboned wreaths, for you the shores a-crowding, for you they call, the swaying mass their eager faces turning. Here, Captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head, it is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse or will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip the victor ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I with mournful tread walk the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead. Oh Captain, My Captain by Walt Whitman. So we have, like, you know, a few things immediately jumping out to me, right? Just like we have this fallen, cold, and dead, even on the deck before this sort of refrain that's closing out each of these stanzas, that sort of comes over into the middle. We very much have, like, a narrative happening through this poem, right? The captain is coming back, the ship is returning, everyone is watching. They find him dead. The flag is flung, all of this celebration is happening, but he's dead. He doesn't answer. We're like, trying to touch him, feel a pulse, anything, as the voyage has been completed, whatever this voyage is, and he is dead. So I think we have like some questions, right? Like we have these characters, these symbols, that are not necessarily literal, right? Well, we know the captain from just like the context of this poem is about Abraham Lincoln as the captain. And then we have like a few other things, right? We have a ship, we have the voyage, we have, things like this object won, the victory that this poem describes. And these are all things that are probably important to understand, right? If our captain isn't a literal captain of a ship, then, we're probably talking about something symbolic with all of these things described. And I think this isn't, too difficult to fill in the pieces, right? If the captain is the head of the ship and the captain is Abraham Lincoln, the ship is the thing that he is the captain of, that being America, right? And Abraham Lincoln, his victory, that, he sort of won for the country, his object won, is both the Civil War and emancipation. These are both things that Lincoln did. I think Lincoln, it ended, like, the Civil War was him too, right? That would make sense. And then the voyage, is all of the stuff leading up to this victory, right? All of the stuff leading to coming back with the sort of spoils, the objects of victory, from this, which would just mean this is like the long, difficult, war part of things, right? This poem feels so on point. It is very on point, right? This poem is not vague, right? It's not really hiding anything from us, right? Oh, captain, my captain, our fearful trip is done. The war is over, right? Emancipation has been declared. Of course, this has like a sort of dramatic irony or a historical irony, us knowing that, emancipation was very much not the end of of the plight of many, right? The trip was not over for many people in America. But one might have thought at the time, that it was. The ship has weathered every wrack. The prize we sought is won. Right? So it has been a very difficult time, weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. We've had victory in the war and in, emancipation. The port is near. The bells I hear. The people all exulting. While follow eyes the steady keel. The vessel grim and daring. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting. So, we have this, like, celebration. We have this return. We have this victory. And, the ship has been steadied, right? Although it has this sort of implication from before of the war, grim and daring. The country is back. It's steady. But it's weathered something. But oh heart, 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 oh bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. He's dead, right? Very on point. Oh captain, my captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for the flag is flung. For you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills. For you the bouquets and ribboned wreaths, for you the shores a crowding, for you they call the swaying mass, their eager faces turning, right? All of this celebration, all of this victory is won by this man, and he's dead. Right here, captained your father, this arm beneath your head. It is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. Right? We almost can't imagine this. The fact that he is dead, it's a dream. It must be a dream. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm, nor he has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, the voyage closed and done. From fearful trip the victor ship comes in with object won. Right? So again we have this idea, right? We are safe, we are steady, and yet like the person who led that doesn't get to see the fruits of their labor, right? And I think maybe this is like the truly tragic part of this poem, the thing that maybe it is simple, but the part that kind of hits you in the feels, this fact that oh captain, this like we even have this like capitalized importance to captain. We call him father in this third stanza, right? We have all this victory and celebration for him, and he does not get to actually see that. So he's like fought hard, right? He's like led the ship through what we describe as very difficult, right? It's more tragic when we know that we've weathered every rack, when we know that it was grim and daring, when we know that it was a fearful trip, right? It was a long voyage, all of that. He did all of this, and fundamentally, right, it creates this feeling of selflessness, maybe, to me. This idea of like sacrifice, not martyrdom necessarily, because I think a martyr usually dies and then the change happens afterward. They become a symbol inspiring, and Lincoln was maybe in that capacity an anti-martyr, where he won emancipation and then was killed, and then the whole dream of that fell apart in the Reconstruction era, because the historical context, right? We have the Emancipation Proclamation. He gets killed, and then basically within like 20 years we're back to the subjugation of black people in the South under Jim Crow laws. And knowing that context, it's very tragic. And I don't know when Walt Whitman wrote this, right? That's probably important. Written in 1865. And then when was Lincoln? He was killed in 1865. So it was right after. So Walt Whitman doesn't have this like historical context of what comes next. And there is like another layer of, I think, tragedy that comes from that. This thought that like he sacrificed, his life in a sense for this goal, for this dream, for the country, whatever. And then, he died, but there's hope. He died, but there's celebration. He died, but there's at least, he's led the country to like a better place, probably. But I think like even just 20 years later, or, in our case, 160 years later, The poem like very quickly historically takes on a different tone, because then you have this captain who died and then like it sort of fell apart after, right? So it's very much like a place and a time. uh but I think Nikki, you say this poem feels very on point, and I feel like it probably only works because it is. um I mean, I would imagine, right, that the assassination of Lincoln was like this, I mean, this like national tragedy, probably, and everyone was, you know, torn up, and it was awful, and like the nation was probably grieving as a whole. And I would imagine, this poem happening, being written right after, being written so close to that, is just very raw, is just coming from that point of grief, and rather than trying to, make something deeply complicated or artistic out of the situation, more so to just, directly address the spirit of what people were feeling, directly speak to this sort of grief that was happening in the country. Um, and I mean, the question we then ask, right, uh, is, does this poem maybe succeed in doing that? Does it capture well that feeling? On point often lands it deeper emotionally, yeah, because when it's on point, when it's very direct, anyone can understand it, right? This isn't meant to be a puzzle. This isn't meant to be particularly difficult, and that makes sense. Like an entire nation is grieving. This is written like for that nation, uh, and when you have to stop and analyze, when you have to stop and break down, what is the saying, all of that, it's very, um, it somewhat takes one out of that immediate emotionality, to say like, wait, what is this talking about? What does this mean? Right? That question is not usually a helpful one, when you're trying to get something to land emotionally, like very quickly. So it probably does help. And I think a lot of this poem like does do a really good job of this feeling of like grief and anguish and emotional outcry, um, and having these moments that are just, uh, you know very sad and very lamenting, um, for like a whole lot of reasons, and maybe we'll talk about these and read through it again, um, sort of, I don't know, explain the joke, if you will. Um, like I wonder if explaining how some of these things might uh, contribute to emotionality kind of takes away. I'm not sure. I go back and forth on this, whether like analysis is an effective way to make something feel more emotional, and I think it depends on the poem. Uh, but I think he does a lot of really good things in this poem. These things that I'm I'm underlining in red as I'm like looking through this. Uh, and I'm just gonna read the whole thing again. And maybe as I read, like I'm thinking about some of these red parts that I'm underlining. O captain, my captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh heart, 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 oh the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead. O captain, my captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills. For you bouquets and ribboned wreaths, for you the shores a-crowding. For you they call the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Here, captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head, it is some dream that on the deck you've fallen, cold and dead. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse or will. The ship is anchored, safe and sound, the voyage closed and done. From fearful trip, the victor ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells! But I, with mournful tread, walk the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead. So, there are a few more things that I noticed even while reading this. I've circled that we have these periods, and the period is only used at the end of the stanza. It's only used after fallen, cold, and dead. Those are the only three periods in the poem. And it gives it this, like, it punctuates it, right? It says it's over, dead, period. It's sort of blunt and brutal and, compared to, the steady keel, the weathered every rack, the bells, the exulting, the bouquets, the bugle, right? The flag being flung. We have, fallen, cold, and dead. Is very blunt, raw. It's that feeling of, kind of not understanding that shock in grief, right? It is some dream that on that deck, it's that, like, just being hit by it on a very, I think, visceral level, and that's like just one thing, right? That those hit. The other main punctuation then is like commas, semicolons, and then these like exclamation points. And I think like we don't always see exclamation points like that often in poetry. I mean, particularly in like a modern time. But this just like, oh bells, right? Oh captain, oh hearts, here captain, dear father, right? We have these exclamation points that I think, against everything else, just bring out these really heightened feelings, that sort of despair, right? We have the periods and the you've fallen cold and dead as like the bluntness of grief. And then we have oh captain, my captain, oh bells, these kinds of things as like the wailing, sorrowful, outwardly expressed grief. Um, so we are starting to like describe, the shock and the feeling and the pain in different ways, which I think is like a very effective thing to do when we're talking about something being tragic. People experience this in different ways, and the poem like probably accomplishes uh, the by talking about multiple different kinds of grief, by digging into that. I think the poem probably becomes again more like accessible. It speaks to more different people. The more ways it kind of expresses this emotion. Uh, Something I think is like really, really special that the poem does is you have like the flag is flung, the bugle trills, bouquets and wreaths. You have like bells tolling as the captain returns, right? And these people on the shore, they don't know, right? This is like the sort of story being told in this poem. The people don't know yet that the captain is dead. So the people are celebrating, they're happy, and they're using all of these symbols of celebration, uh, which also happen to be, symbols that mark death. Like all of these things have a very like funerary note to them, which the people are like unwilling or unknowingly uh, sort of creating, right? We have bells tolling. We have a flag being flung, which, like, for a hero of war, right, they'd be buried with a flag. The bugle trilling, right, to play taps on a bugle is to mourn the death of someone. Bouquets, flowers, again, these things associated with funerals, with death. Even calling out and swaying, like this feeling of all of these people looking in celebration, but then like accidentally, um, uh, you know, doing something in a funerary way. It's a very lovely use of juxtaposition. Yeah, yeah, like if we, it's interesting because like the juxtaposition isn't like within these words necessarily, right? The juxtaposition is like the celebration against the idea of death, right? This is like the juxtaposition that we create, that these two things play off of each other. And then within, like, the fact that this has been juxtaposed allows for a double meaning within the words in this section, right? It changes the entire meaning of all of this in a very like ironic sense, right? Dramatic irony is when you the audience know something that the character does not, and we reading "Oh Captain, My Captain" see these people um, celebrating victory. And then we know the juxtaposition present because we are on the ship with Walt Whitman, lamenting his captain. And so we can create a new meaning, a new association for every single one of these symbols. Rather than bells of celebration, they're bells of death. Bugle of celebration, no, bugle of death. Flag, bouquets, again, death. Right. So we reframe the entire celebration as a funeral. And that's probably really impactful to how people experienced the death of Lincoln, because they had this moment of celebration and this thing where they thought like, we've won. The world, or like the country is going to be better. We're going to have emancipation. We're going to be, better. We're not going to have slaves. We're going to have a change. And then that celebration very quickly switched into a funeral, where, all of those same symbols were probably being used not out of celebration, but out of remembrance. And that to me is like probably the coolest thing happening within the poem, right? Is this reframing of celebration into mourning, into like a funereal kind of thing, uh, because like that's what happened. That's literally like the thought process that probably happened for people in America at the time. Elias, oh yes, oh captain, my captain. Yeah, we are reading the big Walt Whitman. Uh I have not. This is like my first time reading this poem. Like I heard, snippets of it in Dead Poets Society, right? Maybe just the "Oh Captain, My Captain" part. I don't know if they ever read any amount of the poem. Uh, but yeah, I think it does some cool things. I think within that film, Dead Poets Society, uh, this poem, like understanding this poem, certainly adds a layer to that film, right? Where Dr. Keating, uh, "Oh Captain, My Captain," sort of has this victory of teaching the students these things, and then becomes this, assassinated captain. The scene where they all get up on their desks. Yeah. Um, and yeah, and then he has his fallen cold and dead, right? Not literally, but as he takes the fall within the school. Um, and it makes a lot of sense as like an artistic choice within that film. But we're mostly here to talk about the poem. uh, I'm a bit late in what sense is the O Captain meant in an ironic sense? Ah, I always interpret it as an homage to something greater, someone above, perhaps an idealized as someone of higher order. Ah, it's that ironic is not. I maybe wrote this in a poor place. This ironic word. I think the irony is actually talking about basically everything except the "O Captain, My Captain" in this stanza. This big bracket, so to speak, where and it's not even ironic in like the traditional sense of irony, but more of a dramatic irony, where the characters within the story, right? This is something that happens in theater. Um, have some amount of knowledge, and then the audience has knowledge that they do not. This is called dramatic irony. Um, and that's when we the audience know more than the characters, right? That's a version of irony. So, within this stanza, right, these people are celebrating because they do not know yet that the captain is dead. We're still returning on the ship, right? While follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring, right? They're exulting on the shore, and they see the ship coming in, but they don't know that on the very deck of that ship, he is dead. And now we have them celebrating, ringing bells, flag is flung, bugle trills, bouquets, right? All of this stuff that, in a very ironic sense, are also the same symbols we would use for a funeral, right? Where we would have the bugle playing taps, where we would have the flag, I think like on the coffin, maybe also being flown. I don't actually know. You would have the bells ringing. Uh, you would have bouquets, right, being given. You would have maybe wreaths too. Um, and for you they call the swaying mass, right, is very much something that could evoke the idea of a funeral as well. So you've created like an ironic setup in a sense where these people are celebrating and they don't know of the horror that has occurred, right? um, which is extremely tragic. And I think it's a tragic irony. And when they do learn, right, we can think about the historical context. They have this moment where they get to celebrate, not knowing that he is going to get killed for what he did. And then he does, and, maybe within the heads of these people, maybe Walt Whitman himself noticed, we are doing all the same things to mourn the death that we were doing to celebrate the victory. And, it also creates a feeling that, we have this idea, some people, I've heard the sentiment, they don't like the idea of being mourned, right? And people say, I don't want anyone to be sad at my funeral. I want them to, like, celebrate my life. I think this is a sentiment I hear often from people. Um, and I think that also plays into this feeling, right? That in death we celebrate life. But then there's also this, like, celebrating the life and not knowing the death. So it's sort of like a really cool inversion of some of these ideas, I guess. But yes, what you said also, I always interpret it to be an homage to something greater, something above, perhaps idealized as someone of a higher order natural leader. And I do think Captain, right, really accomplishes that well. You're right that this line, this "Oh Captain, my Captain," anything with these, like, exclamation points is very, very, like, genuine and just mourning and calling out, because this is the exclamation of the guy on the deck with the captain, and so and this does have a feeling of the ideal, right? When we talk about a ship, I think this very simple, symbolic use of the ship has some really important functions, right? Because with the ship, if the captain is, a bad captain, then the ship goes down and we all go down with the ship. And it creates this situation where, the captain becomes, like, responsible for the lives of all people on board. They become this, as you say, Elias, idealized sort of figure. And to put, Abraham Lincoln in that setting, the captain almost becomes higher than, like, president, right? Where the captain is simpler. It's much more straightforward. It says, like, this person is keeping us safe on the ship. They're guiding us through this difficult, ocean, and their failings and their successes directly contribute. I get what you mean. I'm still a bit undecided on the not knowing part. It feels to me as if they noticed he is dead, but it still feels like a reference to waking up from the dead. Perhaps even as far as the religious part. I mean, Whitman was an American, and they had a lot of religious people at the time. I would also link that with the idealized captain, as if they wished he was a prophet that would live again. Right, and we do have a line later that I think supports that idea very well, if I can find it. Da, 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 da. Isn't there a line somewhere? Exalta shores of ring of bells and walk with, but I with mournful tread walk. Here, Captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head. Isn't there something? Maybe I miss. Here, Captain, my father, this arm beneath your head. Maybe I'm crazy. Okay, so I like this idea, right? If we are to have this, like, prophet revival kind of thing that people are hoping for, right? Or that, like, he has crossed from man into ideal, right? He's no longer become literal, and he's like become a symbol, and so like he can be celebrated regardless of death, and be sort of revived in that way. um I think those are all really, that's a very like compelling idea. um and I guess then, like, to look at that, I look to the text, right? O captain, my captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, right? This is like in the first stanza, we're setting the scene. And to me, right, the port is near says, we're not back yet. We are still on the water. And we have later, I walk the deck. I with mournful tread walk the deck, right? So we are still very much on the ship. And that means the ship has not come back yet. We hear in the bay or whatever, the people exulting. We hear them. While follow eyes the steady keel, right? And the keel of the ship is like the motion of it on the water. And that to me says they're watching from the shore as the ship comes in, right? Here's the line I was looking for. O captain, rise up and hear the bells. So to your interpretation, Elias, we do have this like really interesting rise up. This suggestion that we would want him to return, to be more than man, to be greater, to literally like revive and continue, right? And sort of get the recognition for his victory. Rise up and hear the bells, da da da, we have all this description. For you, the shore is a crowding, right? This again to me is setting a scene of the shore is the people not knowing. Like, that's how I read that. I don't think you have to, though. And, but they're eager, right? They don't know yet. Here, captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head, is it some dream? It is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer, his lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm, he has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored, safe and sound. The voyage closed and done. So this is when we like reach the shore. Its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip the victor ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells. Right, they're still exulting. But I with mournful tread, but, right, this word seems so operative to me. They are happy, but I am mourning. Walk the deck, my captain lies fallen, cold and dead. And actually I think there are like some interesting interpretations of this where, okay, I think this is like a point that creates like 4 interpretations, Elias, all of which I think are probably pretty valid. So we have the idea of like, this is a really interesting, like, a really, really good observation. We have the people, and in one situation, the people know, and they continue to celebrate. And in one situation, the people don't know, and they continue to celebrate, right? We have this as like an interpretive choice. And, these mean different things, I think. In one case, the people know that Lincoln is dead, and they choose, if they know, to continue to celebrate his life, right? And then we have this but I am mournful, I walk the deck, my captain lies fallen cold and dead. And I think this could indicate, right, Walt Whitman, or the I, which I doesn't necessarily have to be Walt Whitman here, but this observation that the people are celebrating, but our captain, our guide, is gone. And I, for that, am deeply mournful. I, in fact, right, want my captain to rise up. I still want to be led. And this almost like creates this knowing omen, this feeling that like without the captain, without the guide, we are going to go back into, difficult waters. And these people, by celebrating, are sort of, you know, creating ideality, putting this higher celebration onto someone who like, is now dead and they don't have that anymore. And that's an interesting interpretation, right? That's one way to see it. We could also have the people not knowing, and then it's this like feeling of weight of this one person who knows against those who don't. This sort of ironic idea. I feel that there's like a separate interpretation within this one though, that isn't necessarily this idea of like an omen. I think there's another reading here which is more what you were implying, which I want to talk about too. Please say if I'm giving too much of my own interpretation. You are never giving too much of your own interpretation, Elias. I love when people in chat have interpretations because it really illustrates the best part of analysis is that it's subjective and we have these different ideas and we can also like learn from each other and find new interpretations. In some sense, I feel he has accomplished the wished goal, but perhaps sacrificed everything, including himself for achieving said goal. It's like a mirror to Jesus, yes, innocently dying to forgive the sins of the people. But this time there is no revival, and the people are just straight up hit with a reality, while not able to accept the reality, leaning into the idealized resurrection version. With each paragraph, the reader gets hit with the wall of reality again. Also, please say if I'm giving... No. And right, I think I mentioned this before you came in, that there is a bluntness to fallen, cold, and dead, right? Particularly because the end of the stanzas are the only times we have the period. It's a recognition of just like this finality of death. Fallen, cold, and dead, right? And I think yeah, so if we have this desire for him to rise, we have this sort of like fervor, this religiosity about celebrating him when he is dead and will not return. And then there's this like constant nagging feeling or crushing feeling that he is dead and there will not be any more of that kind of idealized guidance. And I think okay, I really like this. I really like your interpretation. Like the mirror to Jesus thing, I think is very like on point. And so there is this idea of this like religious sort of almost delusion, right? We have this idea. I think this idea is really important. The idea of man, right? Literal person Abraham Lincoln, crossing into ideal, crossing into the realm of captain, crossing into the realm of, revival, prophet, martyr, these kinds of things, that give a hope that goes beyond like the reality of what is. And I mean, so we were talking about this middle stanza, right? And to me, right, the so let's say, right, we have these people idealizing him. We have these people celebrating him. Um, right. Oh, captain, my captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills. For you bouquets and ribboned wreaths, for you the shores a crowding. For you they call the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Um, and I think to me, like, if we interpret them as, um, making him ideal, sort of uh, lifting him up to this level, the irony to me is still present, like personally, where they are celebrating him in a way that is reminiscent of death, right? And so, in sort of celebrating him and hoping that he continues and making him larger than life, they're simultaneously taking the actions, reminiscent of the end of a life, right? Um, and then, but I think like if we interpret them as knowing within the first stanza, it definitely like reframes some of what is going on. Oh, captain, my captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. Um, and then we really have this like, romanticization that the ship now has a steady keel because we've won this prize because of this grim and daring, and so we like get to celebrate. It's weathered all of the pain, and now we can have this like betterness. There is a sort of uh, uh, a slight delusion, right? If you place the people as knowing and they're like, we've won and it's better and he sacrificed and it's awesome, and everything's going to be better and oh my gosh, it's awesome, right? And then they get hit like, but he's dead. Oh, no, 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 but we're celebrating, but he's dead, right? And I think this last line, or this last stanza, like, is really interesting then because we have his lips pale and still, no pulse nor will. I think this calls to the fact that he will not be making more speeches, right? He will not have more will. He will not be able to keep fighting for us. But then we, like, go back. We flip back. The ship is anchored safe and sound, the voyage closed and done, right? It's done. It's over. We're saved. It's great, right? Um, from fearful trip, the victor ship comes in with object one, right? Like the joy of victory is so much that it overrules the idea that this could be tragic. Um, which then maybe again, you know, goes back to some amount of an ominous feeling in this poem, a knowing wisdom of the poet that it will not be all sunshine and rainbows, but maybe that's just me looking at it with an additional historical context that this victory will quickly be lost, right? And then it's a warning against, at least from our perspective, in a modern sense, it becomes a sort of warning that we ought not celebrate our victories too quickly, that we ought not have a delusion that like these great men will come and fix things, right? That it's a continual uh, kind of process, and there is no even keel, there is no steady ship, and this idea of like positive change is an unending pursuit. Um, that's like a modern political interpretation of it, which sort of takes context outside of the text. It is written like a dirge. I don't know. I mean, I know that dirge, like there are like specific formal things to that. Um, um, a lament for the dead, uh, mourning or grief. is there particular structural things to the dirge? Is the dirge a form, or is a dirge just an idea? A dirge is a somber song or lament expressing mourning or grief, such as may appropriate for performance at a funeral. And this certainly is like a poem lamenting the death. Nikki, you might know more about I mean, you seem to know more about dirges than me. So if you have anything to fill in with that definition, I would appreciate it. Yeah, delusion is a great word. To want to live in the delusion and realizing you cannot have your delusion become true. I remember the mother saying no, 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 and such after Neil's death in the Dead Poets Society. Yeah, I like how in Dead Poets Society, like, Neil also sort of acts as oh, captain, my captain, as like the student who most went and embodied, uh, the ideas of Dr. Keating, right? Where they like both sort of occupy, that narrative space. But yeah, the denial of grief, right? This poem then has denial, it has shock, right? The fallen, cold, and dead. I don't know what the stages are grief, but I was talking earlier that it kind of seems to cover a lot of different ways of grieving. And that's a very effective thing about it. I don't know if it comes to acceptance. Yeah. And I mean, even just the exclaiming, "Oh, captain, my captain," this like heart, 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 right? These like shouting things maybe fit that idea of like anger and screaming, and not being able to process that way. This like mournful tread, just not knowing what to do, has like a depressed kind of sorrowful feeling. Um, I don't know what bargaining is, but I don't know. I don't know about those things very well. The stages of grief, but it definitely shows a picture of like the different ways, that the country might have been grieving at the time. So that's kind of cool. Uh, a dirge is very similar to an elegy, just usually shorter. So like a poem you might read during a funeral. Gotcha. Or even sung. This could be sung in a melancholic way at a funeral for sure. Yeah, totally. Um, and yeah, I think that's a dirge. I think that's a good word to use here. Wait, didn't Todd also live in delusion directly after um, it being told that Neil is dead? I mean, there are many references between the Kubler-Ross grief psychology model and this poem. Yeah, I mean, uh, Todd is like our sort of like pseudo main character, right? I don't remember all their names. Um, is he the one who like ran out into the snow and just like couldn't process it and was like vomiting? Uh, in which case, yeah, okay. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, maybe that's like a degree of shock, not processing. Maybe that's denial, right? Um, there are definitely like certain members of the cast who are like angry and blaming each other, right? At the end of the film, uh, you have, yeah. So I do think, there's maybe a justification to analyze certainly that film, through that sense. I'm not sure it maybe maps perfectly onto the poem itself, but the poem does show multiple different ways that grieving happens. And I'd imagine, you're reading this poem as a American in 1865, that you very well could, um, see the kind of grief that you are feeling and sort of place that onto the poem, where if you are angry and shouting to the sky, just those, "Oh, captain, my captains," that, "Oh, heart, heart, heart," right, is going to hit that person. And maybe the person who is walking with a mournful tread will identify more with the mournful tread part of the poem. Um, the the ones celebrating his life, or the ones in this denial, um, you know, might, associate with that part of the poem. Some are just sort of empty and vacant, fallen, cold, and dead. That's all they can think about. Uh, and I think that's a very good thing this poem does. And I think something we can um, sort of use directly as inspiration, right? Uh, that, if we're trying to write a poem that describes, any particular emotion, right? Be it grief, be it anger, be it whatever. The obvious thing we do is describe our own experience, right? We'll talk about, I'll write a poem about anger and it'll be from my anger. Or I'll write a poem about grief and it will be my grief. But something this poem does is it, broadens that out to all of these other interpretations, right? It has his anger and her denial and, the sentiment of the people, and it broadens that emotion. And I think that can make the poem itself, in this way, more accessible, is what that motion contributes to. Because then, like, people can place some of their own feelings into your feelings. And, in this poem, right, Walt Whitman, maybe is I, and maybe is the one with the mournful tread who's just trying to, who's sort of like shuffling around, despondent. But if he just wrote about that, the people who are angry, the people who are in denial, the people who are in these other, conceptions of the emotion and the shock, might not purely, experience that. It's also very possible that Walt Whitman, went through all of these stages of grief, because that's sort of the idea of the model, is we do all of them in many cases, or some of them. So there's that. Heart, heart, heart also feels like a resurrection spell, or heart CPR, trying to keep the person alive. Yeah, I mean, like, we're almost literally, imploring, right, the heart to keep beating, right? We want it to keep going. Heart, 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 like, beat, please. And yet, rather than a beat, we get bleeding drops of red. We get, death. We get the failure of it. We get it continuing to push blood out of the body. And yeah, and I like like you say, a resurrection spell, this repeated, chant, has, anytime we repeat things, it has the possibility to evoke the idea of chanting, this sort of religiosity, this spirituality of repeated words, of imploring, of just continuing, of saying something over and over again. Yeah. Yeah, but I think this is something useful to think about. Like, that's as, one lesson that this poem teaches us as poets, right? To write something that looks at something with our emotion, but then tries to reach out and empathize with other emotional states, other interpretations of that feeling, right? Um, let's say your country, uh, let's say my country is at war with, not even at war, is bombing another country into the ground and like killing people. And I have an emotional reaction to this, right? But other people probably have a different one, right? Some people are angry, some people are sad, some people are confused, some people just don't understand the situation. Some people have heard so much world news that they just tap out and don't care. Um, and a poem that concerns all of those viewpoints, uh, and does so very subtly and very in a very nuanced way, uh, could then speak to all of those people, rather than just me giving my own reaction. And I think, you know, if one is trying to write a poem that many people can enjoy, and I think that's an admirable way to write, um, writing something that is accessible, then that's maybe a tool we can lift from this poem and use in our own writing, and that's cool. Uh, and other things too. I mean, like we can look to the use of punctuation and the variation in it, and exclamation points, commas, semicolons, em dash, periods in very specific places. Right, it's definitely using the suite of English linguistic options, right? Yes, it shows very much how different people react differently and feel differently instead of just one person's emotion. How would you interpret this arm beneath your head? Yeah, that's a line that I didn't really talk about at all. Uh, and and one that we come back to, right? We have my father does not feel my arm, and we have this arm beneath your head. So this is something like an event, a symbol within this poem that happens. Uh, and I will talk about that after a brief break, which is very well needed because I haven't eaten anything today and would love to have a little snack in the 3 minutes uh, that break entails. So get up. Yes, I will also drink some water, Elias. Get up, drink some water, have a snack, go to the bathroom, something, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. See you then. Hello, welcome back. Um, Too much sun. Okay, welcome back. I am still Imogen. I now have a small amount of food in my stomach, so I feel alive. And we're still reading "Oh Captain, My Captain." So, I assume that meant he was cradling his body. Okay, yeah. So we're asking the question of what we think the arm beneath your head means, right? And I am gonna read the whole poem again, but we think cradling his body. Yes, exactly. I just noticed how the poem goes from "O Captain, the idol" to "Father," perhaps a more grounded realization. That is a compelling idea and one that I think is worth exploring. So, "O Captain, My Captain" by Walt Whitman. "O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh heart, 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 oh the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead. O Captain, my Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills, for you bouquets and ribboned wreaths, for you the shores a-crowding. For you they call, the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Here, Captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head. It is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip the victor ship comes in with objects won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I with mournful tread walk the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead. So, we have this arm, and we have this heart, rise up imploring arm beneath his head, like you say, Nikki. Cradling, I think, is like the immediate scene that's happening. But I also wonder, right, if some of this is like the trying to hold his head up, sort of this rise up hope that he would like somehow come back to life, right? This like, I mean, maybe that's like the bargaining, right? Like the trying to get him to come back, to sit up, to return. And then, that gets followed up in the next stanza. My captain does not answer, his lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm, right? And this maybe is truly the recognition, right? That shift to like, he is dead, right? And he doesn't feel this, and he doesn't feel this effort I have, this deep desire that I want him to still be alive. In which case, the narrator is going through this sort of very rapid grieving process of, calling out, yelling, right? Invoking the spiritual even. And then we have this like speaking to him, trying to get him to sit up, denial, this like attempt to save him as well. And then, this acceptance of his death, this sort of now sad repetition of the ship is safe and sound. Um, the object won, the voyage closed, the fearful trip, right? This very much evokes the first stanza. So then we have like the victory from before repeated and now tinged, well, now entirely reframed by like the death. And I was drawing a line there that y'all can't see. So I do think the arm has a capability to symbolize, a little bit more than just him being cradled and dead. And yeah, this is when we have in both cases with the arm, right? These are the two spots where we call the captain father. Nowhere else do we call him father in the poem. Otherwise, he's always captain. And I do think this speaks to like a direct, one-on-one sort of intimacy, a feeling of like this person meant so much to me as a guide. And then, like the father as a figure is slightly different than the captain, right? The captain is the one who like leads the ship, and if they die, we all go down with it. Or no, like if they fail to lead the ship, we all go down. So much is in their hands. Father is slightly different, and maybe there is a little bit of the notion of acceptance here, because the father is like fundamentally, right, someone we love and someone who leads us, and in a very masculine sense, right? Walt Whitman, man, is this first idealized figure in like the young boy's life, right? Is the father, the person to follow, the person to look to as guide. And more often than not, the father is someone that the child has to grieve the death of. Usually the father dies before the child. And this is like a very important, like a lot of these like masculine rites of passage in some way involve, outgrowing, right, the father, becoming a man of your own. Like, and then, like the grieving and the moving on and the finding one's own way as a man without this like idealized guide of a father. So I think to use father, right, maybe has some of this like subtle implication of someone who must be outgrown, but also someone who we love dearly in a familial way, who is that important, who is, ideal in a pure, almost like childlike sense, where the child sees their father like truly, like the young boy, and like young girl to a great extent as well, sees the father as this very like idealized protector, and but also one who there is a knowledge we will not always have the protection, we will not always have the safety and the comfort of clinging to your father's leg or hiding behind their great silhouette. And I think that is an important thing within this poem, right? Father is also creating much more personal grief trajectory. Captain seems distant somehow. Yeah, Captain has this like professionality, right? Captain itself is a profession. But then the captain is like a status, right? It's a leader above the rest of the people on the ship. They have some amount of control, whereas the father is a caring figure who directly wants the best for their child. This is the Dead Poets poem, Darmadam. This is O Captain, My Captain by Walt Whitman, written in 1865 to mourn the death of Abraham Lincoln. Yeah, welcome in. So yeah, Elias, I think this arm and this like physical feeling is very important, because it also like, I think it just implies like probably a sentiment that again speaks to another group of like Americans grieving Lincoln, where some of them probably saw him as this like caring, masculine ideal, and more so than leader, really like someone who might have seemed compassionate. I mean, I'm not sure how Lincoln was perceived, but in that sense, he could have become a sort of, father figure, right, to the nation, or to certain people within the nation. And so to speak to this also just speaks to another demographic of people, another particular brand of grief, a particular type of mourning that must have been happening in the country at the time, which is, makes the poem, I think, additionally effective if it's trying to capture the spirit of the times and the spirit of the people grieving this loss. I know Walt Whitman from Breaking Bad. Yeah. It's funny. I feel like every time I've been saying it on stream today, I'm like, Walter White, Walt Whitman, WW. I completely forgot about the Lincoln. What do you mean? The Lincoln? There's a joke here? I think there's a joke here. I don't know. Is there a joke here? Is that a crying face emoji? Or maybe you're saying that you got into the weeds of the analysis and forgot also that it relates back to Lincoln and like that particular part of the analysis. I don't know. I'm unsure what you mean. But in the second case of what I said, reading the poem and then thinking about, the father and the heart and the captain. Whoops, the was autocorrect. I literally forgot the historical reason why it exists. Yeah, poems like this are interesting, right? Because we can look at the poem on the page and we can think about how father relates to captain. And we can think about how, captain and the ship and these things like interact with each other on a level of the story, right? And then, right, there's this additional layer of the historical context of all of this stuff. And I think it's useful within the analysis whenever we think of something new, whenever we, have a new bit of information, right, that we come to, that we both place it within the poem, within the text and how it's interacting with each other on the page. But then we also have to place that thing, or not have to, but it's useful to place that thing within the historical context. So we say, my father, okay, what might this mean on the level of this person and this interaction? And then how does father interact with the idea of Lincoln, and how could have people maybe related to that within the present context? And that's always a good thing to defer back to, especially with these very like historical poems, because this is this poem like is sort of like I've been thinking about this lately, that this poem is like pseudo journalistic, and I've been thinking about poems like this that lean toward being, maybe a better word is like reportative, where it is taking the spirit of a people and a moment, and trying to like capture this within a poem. And this creates both an experience, like an artistic experience and an emotional experience for the reader in the future. But also, what this accomplishes is, teaching us something. Like, this poem is, in some capacity, didactic, and that is just to say, a teaching poem. It's something that gives us information, that transmits, a historical time and a place. Um, and I think that's something I've been thinking about in my own poetry, and sort of something I'm interested in writing personally a lot of the time. Father Abraham was also a religious reference as well. Yeah, there is maybe that slight double meaning. Father, right? His name, of course, Abraham Lincoln. Um, yeah, gives and like to call him father, you know, once again reinforces this feeling within the poem of some religiosity, of some spirituality, of some ideality, right? And we can look at the father as an idealized figure in the mind of the child. We can also look at father in the idealized sense of the religious father, and that opens us up to at least two uh, sort of reinterpretations of the work, which is pretty cool, right? Uh, yeah. um, yeah. To me, like that's all of that is the most impressive part of this poem. The way that, I mean, so what we started with, right? One of the first things we said and talked about on stream today was that this seems very on point, right? This poem seems very, very simple at first, right? Oh, so we're talking about Lincoln, right? Oh, Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought has won. Okay, the Civil War is over, right? The port is near. The bells I hear. The people all exulting. While follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. We're celebrating this one thing. But, oh heart, 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 the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. We're celebrating, but he's dead. It's good and it's bad, right? Oh Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills, for you bouquets and ribbon wreaths, for you the shores are crowding, for you they call the swaying mast, their eager faces turning. Again, seems very like simple, probably on the surface. It's like we're just talking about what's happening. Again, you're dead and that's sad, and then like sort of reiteration of the start. He's dead and he's dead and it's sad, right? This is sort of what we talked about at the start. It just seems very on point, telling the story of what happened. But I think like the most impressive thing about this poem then to me is that it can seem very simple on the surface, and it can seem like it's just talking about something happening in the world very, you know, sort of basically and in a very straightforward manner, right? And then at the same time, when we actually look at all the different ways it can be interpreted and all the different, you know, varieties of grief that it's speaking to, between, you know, the grief of the father and the sort of religious grief and the ironic tragic grief and the, you know, like just the immediate within the poem, the shock, the different ways that someone might feel this. um it has like a very subtle underlying complexity, uh you know, kind of to the whole poem. And that's really cool, right? That's probably why a poem like this has endured, why something like this is what we would call, you know, great. Because, right, this poem is satisfying for, the average American at the time, right? Because poetry was something that, like, people read and people consumed, and it was like a popular art form. So for the average person, who just reads this a couple times, oh, it's very simple, right? It's very on point. It talks about Lincoln dying. It's very sad. It's this dirge, and maybe it has something in it that I personally relate to. And then when you look at it from like this more analytic level, yes, it is emotional and it's powerful and has something you might relate to as it pertains to grief or fathers or spirituality or shock or bargaining or denial or all of these things. But also there's the fact that when you really dig into it, right, it's doing all of these things, and it manages to seem simple while speaking to like numerous different like sort of modes of interpretation, kind of under the guise of a very straightforward, on the nose kind of poem, right? And that's really cool, right? That's really cool, because it makes it able to be popular within the time. It's very possible that like your average person just reads this and like, this is great, and then the sort of academics, the analysts, the ones who decide in many cases what gets archived and what gets studied, and what carries on into the future for better or for worse, probably had lots of reasons to like this poem too, right? As a historical kind of reportative piece, as something that is doing very intentional, very polished, formal things, and has an underlying complexity and speaks more broadly to grief itself, right? I think it's cool, right? I say cool a lot, and good and interesting, but it is. I do think it is. Um, yeah, yeah. It's a dope. It's a dope poem. I I don't know if I have anything more to say. We've like analyzed it fairly thoroughly. Uh, we've even touched on some things we can learn from this poem, which is always a good thing that I like to include in the streams when I can. How can we apply this to our own work? Um, right. Like we all could very well go and take the prompt of take an event that's happening in the world right now and write a poem that reports on the sentiment of that event through your own interpretation, but also the emotional reactions of others, right? If that was a prompt for this piece, that's what I would give you all to try to like emulate it, right? Um, and I think we could very well go try to do that. If you had to change the title to a new one, what would it be? And so I take it then that keeping the title the same is not a viable answer, since you say a new one. I do like the title of this, like, right, like that sentiment. Oh, captain, my captain, right? It's just very like, you lament, oh, captain, right? But if I had to switch it to something else, So I think it needs to speak to both the um, the tragedy of the situation, and it needs to speak to like the ideality, right? It has to have the positive and the negative. And oh captain, my captain, right? It has oh captain, this like just uh exclaimed lament. It has my captain, it has my emotional feeling. It has the idea of captain as the idealized figurehead, right? So it has like general lament, it has personal feeling, it has idealized title. And I think another title would have to do the same thing, I think. Because, I mean, I like how "O Captain, My Captain" operates as the title. So, uh, um, unless I wanted to go outside of the text of the poem, right? In which case we could, like, right now I'm looking within the text. This is often how I title my own poems, like from a personal perspective. Um, um, my father does not feel my arms. He has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound. The voyage closed and done. From fearful trip to victor ship, exult, O shores, and ring, O bells. But I, with mournful tread, walk the deck. My captain lies fallen, cold, and dead. Like, I don't think just taking something like fallen, cold, and dead, I don't think that would be appropriate, right? Because it misses a lot of the sentiment of the poem. Um, I think, and then to say something like this, any of this exulting idea, like interestingly, like this bells, the flag is flung, like these kinds of things, um, because of my own personal interpretation with the irony, um, take on both the positive and the tragic. Like I could see for you, the flag is flung as a title for this poem. It has this like alliteration, similar to the captain thing. Um, that's probably the best of these lines. Out of like for you, the bugle shrills is eh, but for you, the flag is flung. Right? It has this like American, this very like uh patriotic sentiment, which maybe it's too patriotic. I mean, the poem is very patriotic, right? So I think that would be okay as a title. Um, you could also, I mean, like maybe one could find a title pulling from the Emancipation Proclamation, but I don't know what Lincoln said in that speech. Uh, but speaking to like some of that victory, um, and like directly, you know, connecting it to Lincoln in that way might be a good avenue to title this poem, right? If I were to change it. Uh, you know, you could go hyper reportative and call it America 1865. That might be too much. Um, these are options. They're okay. Um, like 1865 could be an interesting kind of title for something like this, which then calls your attention to it as a historical piece, which is maybe a sentiment or a thought that I have, it being 2026 and looking at this fundamentally through a historical context, whereas in the moment to call it 1865 might have seemed like really odd, although it could be to say like this is the poem of the time, this is what the people are feeling in America. um, and people might have liked that, you know. Uh, you know, if I had to choose, I think it's For You the Flag is Flung, Elias. But I do not think that title is as good as Oh Captain, My Captain. Just because I mean, it's so snappy. It kind of fills the narrative ideas of the poem without like speaking to them too directly. I like titles that do this, where we can analyze this title as, "Oh Captain, this feels like lament. My Captain, this feels like tenderness. Captain, this has this idea of the ideal. My, this places me within the scene," right? Um, and it sort of in a sense sums up the different parts of the poem in a very subtle way. Um, but you know, and I'm not sure there's a line within the poem that does it as well as that. But I think the second best one from my view is For You the Flag is Flung. Uh, I do like that question. These questions of, you know, what would I change the title to, or you know, these like um, little things about specific parts of the poem. I appreciate questions like that. I think they lead to interesting conversations a lot of the time. Um, yeah. Man, that pizza I had for lunch must have been loaded with sleeping pills. Uh Dude, it's one of those foods that like weighs you down. Um Hopefully that's in like a good kind of food coma way. Uh I know, like I was talking about this yesterday with someone, that sometimes that heaviness of like food can be very pleasant, and sometimes it can be very like, ugh, gross. Um so I hope you're enjoying that. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Uh for the questions, for the thoughts, for the comments. Does anyone else have questions about this poem? Questions for me about what I think of this poem? Questions, yeah, I mean, mostly things that relate to the poem. If you have other questions, you can ask them after we're done with the poem, right? Um, Anything else? Redeemed stretch? Yeah, I can stretch after we close this out. This poem. I think there's nothing left. Thank y'all for sticking around and listening to some Walt Whitman. We'll still yap for a little bit. But here's "Oh Captain, My Captain." Oh Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh heart, 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 oh the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead. O Captain, my Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills, for you the bouquets and ribboned wreaths, for you the shores a-crowding. For you they call, the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Here, Captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head, it is some dream that on the deck you've fallen, cold and dead. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored, safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip the victor ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I, with mournful tread, Walk the deck, my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead. Okay, there's something else I want to say about the poem. Um, right, like we have this object and then we have this person, right? We have like this choice, this word choice of prize and like object one is really interesting, right? That like and then this word choice, this for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills, for you bouquets and ribbon wreath, for you the shores are crowding, right? That the celebration of this victory is inseparable from like Abraham Lincoln, the idealized kind of person who made this happen. And like without him, this prize, this object, it isn't um like the context of that changes with him being dead. And yes, we can exult, yes, we can ring the bells and celebrate, right? And we should. But at the same time, like it's tarnished, like fundamentally. I think that's like another way to read it. Anyway, that's "Oh Captain, My Captain" by Walt Whitman. Thank you all for uh, hanging out and talking about it and reading. I've been commanded to stretch, so stretch I will. Yep, stretching. I need a good stretch. Yesterday I was slacklining, which is I feel like of course that's something I do. I was slacklining, and that is an activity that involves falling off of a of a line suspended between two trees, and so I feel rather like battered and bruised from being flung off of balancing on a line. So stretching is good. Oh yeah, my obliques. Those are tight. Okay. Yep. That's enough of a stretch, I think. Okay. Welcome back. Yeah. That poem is sick. And like this idea has been on my head for a few months of telling about the time and telling historical things and like teaching and like covering events through poetry. Like I have an idea for a poetry collection that is sort of telling a specific history through poems, and I think a history that would be maybe told better through poetry than it would be purely through, like let's say a piece of nonfiction. And because poetry, right, it carries sentiment, it carries feeling, and it can take an event and not only describe what happened and what's happening, but then it can also include these ideas like this poem does. I'm really glad I read this poem because it gets my mind thinking about these things that I've been thinking about. And like how to what extent can one take this sort of historically reportative poem and use it? Because I mean, like usually the way I write is that I listen. I try to notice things, interesting things, compelling things, artistic things within life, things that stick out as compelling or that other people might not notice. And, I mean, part of the thing with like the news and politics is that like politics and the news really are the things that like you can count on most people to be paying attention to. Uh, and maybe there is some, like, there's probably a lot of value in listening to that stuff in a manner as to find what people aren't talking about, find the things that need to be shared and need to be expressed, or to listen to the sentiment of people broadly as they are consuming those politics. Um, but the difficult thing, right, about doing that in the modern age is that politics are incredibly overwhelming in like the presentation of them online and digital media, and just like, I mean, the horror that is occurring in the world. Um, and I mean, maybe I feel some need, right, to address those things within poetry, probably in the way that Walt Whitman like needed to write this poem. Um, and maybe this will serve as something of a model for me as I try to write things like that. So I'm very glad to now say that I have read the very high school English class kind of poem, "Oh Captain, My Captain," uh, and that I do in fact think it's a good poem, right? For uh, all of the, I've heard the poem get some pretty like you know negative reviews from people that I know. Understandably, like I've just heard the sentiment of being a high schooler and this being part of a curriculum that is very like white person's history, America, dead white men kind of stuff. Uh, which I understand, right? Like, uh, history would be a lot better if it had art that reflected, more people. Um, but it still is like a good poem and a very powerful one. I think one that can teach a lot. So, um, I will not stand for dogging on "Oh Captain, My Captain," I guess. The poem itself, the institutions that allow it to be the one that we read, that like high schoolers are forced to read, yeah, I can get behind hating those. But yeah. um, cool. Hey, and stream didn't crash. I the other day I went through my computer. I'm like finally learning how computers like kind of work in terms of like how the files are stored in different places and what Finder actually does on my computer instead of just like dropping everything onto my desktop, and keeping it all there. And I'm like kind of cleaning out the storage in my computer, and I disconnected it from iCloud, which freed up like 150 gigabytes on my computer for some reason. Uh, so I think now it just works better. And I think part of the reason it was crashing is that it was like it was close to its storage capacity. And I think now the computer just seems to be working better. I mean, it hasn't crashed on this stream, and we're a couple hours in, so that's a good sign. I definitely really don't like when it crashes on me, because that's annoying. But yeah, I think that's all. I don't think I have much more to say, or much to yap about, or much that's of particular concern to me here. Other than that, that was a good poem and that was a good stream, and I'm glad I read it for my own personal self-education and knowledge. And I will probably, as I have done with the Sharon Olds poem and with the Langston Hughes poem, I will probably write a thing and post it on my Substack, because I've been enjoying that, and it's pretty easy, right? I've already done all the analysis. I just have to write it up in a compelling way, and usually those things have some different thoughts and ideas within them too. So certainly keep the eyes open for that. Next stream will not be on Monday because I have another doctor's appointment, and I should really just not schedule them on Mondays, but I did, and I'm not going to change it now. So the next stream will be on Wednesday, March 18th. Wednesday the 18th. And we will read poems from chat. And I will see some of you maybe then. Thank you all so much for watching. And keep making art you love. Bye.